sometimes in Bitcoin, we talk about how, or, we sort of complain how difficult it is to explain Bitcoin to people. And the thing is, if you really sit back for a second and consider how difficult fiat is to explain, right? There was this, you're like, what is it? Well, it's debt. And I mean, what? Right? There was this professor in Switzerland who, as an experiment, is a PhD, he's a monetary expert. He's widely known. I can't remember the guy's name. I want to say Warner. Anyway, he went out and asked a bank. He said, okay, I want you to make a loan for me. And I mean, I'm just going to repay it the next day. But I want you to go through step by step exactly how that loan was created, because apparently PhD monetary economists, they have not figured out whether commercial banks print the money they lend you. Okay. Mm-hmm. So and what he concluded is that when you go to the bank, so you have to have an account at a bank in order to get a mortgage, right? Mm-hmm. Like you would think, well, I want to get a mortgage at your bank. Why can't I just pay you fees and then you send me the mortgage to, my account somewhere else? No, you always have to have an account at that bank. And the reason is because when you go in for a loan, they literally create the money on the spot. Mm-hmm. So that's very hard for people to grasp. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so, when we compare, and notably, that was a monetary expert, PhD. He's been doing money his entire life. He's all over the place doing interviews on money. And he had to go through that with the bank to sit down and figure out exactly how it's created. So when people talk about Bitcoin's complexities, look at fiat. Now, the good news from the perspective of Bitcoin is that, if you take the complexity of fiat, the complexity of central banking, fractional reserve banking, the relationships they have with the money printers. So you have kind of the mother ship, printer over at the Fed, and then you have the little baby franchise printers. And all right, when you try to go through all that, and then you get to the credit card, and where does the credit card money come from? How is that born? And every time a child laughs, a new credit card balance for. So when you actually try to go through all those things, it is very difficult to understand. And you compare that to Bitcoin, where you own it, right? I mean, Bitcoin is literally like the way that your grandmother thinks money works, okay, mm-hmm. which is that you got a coin, and that's a piece of money. And if the bank puts $1 on your, passbook, that's because they got a coin in the vault. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's literally how your grandmother thinks money works, and that is literally how Bitcoin works. Mm-hmm. So in a way, our job is extraordinarily easy. The only reason why people are able to use fiat, despite how ridiculously difficult it is to understand, is because everybody else does it. Okay, so everybody else uses credit cards, and I can see how it works. You buy stuff, you don't have to pay for it. When you're like 70 years old, that's kind of amazing. You're like, wait a minute, let me get this straight. Okay, so you buy stuff, you don't have to pay for it, and then in the mail, they're going to ask you to pay something else, and that's going to be pretty much the same deal, a little bit of fees. Okay, good. That's all people need, because they can see that other people do it. They don't get eaten by lions. Okay, that process works. And so it's ultimately going to be the same in Bitcoin, where normal people using Bitcoin, frankly, they're not going to need to understand it. It is much, much easier to understand than fiat, but they're not going to care. Their question is, are other people using it? Are they using Lightning or whatever other payment technology comes along? I hope there will be more. They're using Lightning. They're paying almost nothing, 3 sats per transaction, whatever the number is. Good, it works. That's really all they need to know.
Yeah, it's amazing how you're already starting to see the difference between layer 1, layer 2 is lost on the user. I know Cash App, you can go in there, you can buy Bitcoin. You can load a Lightning address, you can load a layer 1 address. It doesn't matter, and you just send it off, and it just works. And I think that's where a lot of this is quickly progressing. But Peter, I want to talk to you about what we had mentioned at the beginning of the show is the parallels between the U.S., the Roman Empire. When we look at the Roman Empire, they went through severe currency devaluation situations. There was a crisis in the 3rd century. We had these resets, these debt jubilees that constantly were manifesting themselves from a very high level. Walk the listener through kind of some of these parallels and some of the broader themes that you can kind of piece together.
Yeah, so I had a Substack article on that recently, and kind of going through Gibbon. His thesis on the decline of the Roman Empire. And that actually I did an interview with Charles Payne on Fox News. And Charles Payne he likes the big topics. Okay. I think, most of the day he's chatting with stock jockeys who are like, yeah, rates are going to do this in, the next 3 days. And if I'm wrong, then I bet you keep this. He likes that big picture stuff. So anyway, he was actually the one who brought it up. And I thought, okay, let me go back and look at Gibbons, remember what his stick was. And I actually did a paper on this as well about 10 years ago on sort of the Chinese version of the Roman Empire, which was the Song Dynasty. And the Song Dynasty is famous because they invented paper money. So they recently invented woodblock printing. And at that point, you can do really cheap. If you have monks drawing out your money, it's not really going to work, right? You need something assembly line itself. So the Chinese figured that out. and they went through a similar process. But that got me interested in sort of the fall of empires, right? Specifically, what kinds of things we're doing today that are really imitating these empires throughout history. And when you look at the Roman Empire, the sort of first symptoms, what got the whole ball rolling on it was economic mismanagement. So you had a government that was spending way too much, and then it had actually become predatory on the private economy. Okay, so the taxes, the regulations, arbitrary seizures. There was one point where landlords and peasants were actually fleeing to the Germans, which I don't know, that would be like, it'd be like Americans fleeing to, I don't know, what's the country everybody, to Bangladesh because, because things are so bad in America. That was sort of rapacious government. What inevitably happens in the decline of every empire is that one of the first things they come for is the money. Okay. So you can almost trace, people do this with the Roman Empire. You can literally trace out on a chart the silver content of the Roman coinage. And this will give you almost like an exact marker for how bad things were getting. Now, of course, today, they don't have to clip the coins. They don't have to debase them. So what they do instead is just print money through fiat money. And so again, the inflation rate really serves the same purpose now. So, right now in the world, there's something like half a dozen countries that inflation rates over 100%. These are very, very reliable markers for governments that have completely lost the plot. They have gone from the healthy parasite, right, where the productive economy makes things and the government takes off a hunk and gets to go play with it. That I don't like that. But anyway, that's the best you can hope for when it comes to governments. But when they go from that to actually, they're no longer parasite, now they're predators. That is really the marker that you see in the money. And that's where we are now. And so, you've got runaway deficits. You have the taxes have not increased yet, not substantially, at least not in the US. In Europe and Canada, they tend to be higher. But in the US, they really haven't come up yet, mostly because they're still kind of letting the inflation deal with it. When they get to the limits of inflation, which is really going to come out of the bond markets, then at that point, yes, they're going to go to the next man standing, which is going to be the taxes. But this sort of progressive government takeover of the economy that has really been fueled by fiat, once the cancer gets above a certain size, not only, it's very, very hard to get rid of. A lot of people at that point are depending on the government being large and generous. So it's hard to get enough voters together to try and reduce the size of government. And you do cross some tipping point where at that point, it's just a matter of time. You're fighting sort of rear guard to try and keep what's left of the productive economy. When you get to that stage, that's then what gives you sort of those classic hallmarks of Rome, the barbarian invasions, the corruption in the military,